Hi everybody, I'm Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 19, Michael's Wall. Michael was asleep and dreaming of a memory. It was from 20 years into his past, a day in the forest with Gabriel and John. The two younger men, slim and unscarred, wore blank acolytes' tabards. Michael's covered the plain brown and white of the fellowship. Gabriel had a brilliant cerulean blue shirt, the fashion of Moreau, under his. John's hair was a bit thicker on the top, and there was black in its iron gray, but he would otherwise change little over time. He'd worn a paladin's habit for 15 years by then, and was well known in Antioch. John said, "You're going to be strong, boys. That's dangerous without discipline. Look here." He patted a tall pine, 10 inches thick through the trunk. "What do you think would happen if I struck this tree with my fist, as hard as I could?" Michael said, "You would knock it down." He thought John could do anything. Gabriel scoffed under his breath. "I'd like to see him try." John laughed. "No, I'd break every bone in my hand, that's what would happen. Not to mention the hand would glue itself back together in a mess. Oh no, this tree is much tougher than I am." John drew his caligan. "I could hurt myself in striking such a formidable thing even with this. A bad swing could shatter my wrists. The strength you'll have is a danger to you. It's difficult to control. It takes discipline, practice, and technique to use it on your enemies instead of yourself." John winked, turned, and swung through the pine. Michael would never forget the sound of it. Whack! A deep, rich expression of destruction, compressed into an instant. The heavy tree slipped from its diagonal stump, punched the earth with a tremor, and then leaned into its neighbor's branches, raining needles. Gabriel shrugged. "Not bad." Michael said, "Not bad? That was more impressive than Abraham's sleeping beetle." "Shame about the tree." "Pines are a nuisance." John said, "Watch your heads, boys," and tossed some burlap sacks at them. "Look at all the pine cones. The discipline it takes to fell a tree like that in one stroke starts with smaller tasks, like, say, collecting and shelling pine nuts for our dinner. Hop to it." John lectured them while they gathered, and the two students carried on a private conversation in whispers. Gabriel said, "The beetle was only a demonstration. You don't need to be a sword master if your enemy is unconscious." Michael's chin pulled into his throat. "God's mercy, how dishonorable." "Really? Do devils deserve such regard?" "Well, perhaps not, but honor isn't for others. It's for the self." Gabriel said, "And you question Abraham's?" Michael drew back. No, of course not. That's not what I meant. You're always putting words in my mouth and trying to get at me. Stop it." Gabriel smirked. "Well, at the risk of being honorable, I have to tell you something else you might not have considered. There's little hope of becoming Templar as John's acolyte. You might want to reconsider your opinion of Abraham while you still can. Ordination isn't so far away for us now. I'd hate to take unfair advantage of a humble coffee-beaner like yourself." Michael frowned. "I don't care about that. And don't call me a beaner." Gabriel smiled broadly. "You don't care about that right now." Then he vanished. John's lecture was coming from farther away. "Because you don't want to make the same mistake I did. Remember my finger. Assume you'll only have the time for one strike. Make it your best." Michael looked around, but couldn't find John. "And put it through the middle." Then John's voice was gone as well. The chill forest was empty. It didn't seem right. Michael wasn't supposed to be alone. And he wasn't. He was lying on his mat on the cold stone floor of the church. There had been a small noise, or a brush of air, or a smell. Nothing identifiable, only enough to tell his body that something was in the room with him, and to wake him with a pinch of fear. Then, anger. Michael opened the way and sat up, ready to destroy whatever had dared to molest him in his sleep. He didn't need his sword. He didn't want it. He could snap a Bauron's spine with his bare hands. Sunlight and cold air were rushing in from outside. The door was open. Edward sat on the next mat, beaming. Michael ceased channeling and frowned at him. "Edward! Be careful! You startled me. I might have harmed you." "But you told me to meet you here this morning." "I didn't tell you to hang over me in my sleep like a devil, though, did I?" Edward flinched. The sight of him made Michael even angrier. Michael rose to one knee and put his hand over his face, trying to understand why his urge to beat something to death wasn't going away. He needed to clear his mind. Edward's smile crept back as he watched Michael meditate. That was going to be him. He was going to be a knight of the church, too, just like Michael. Unable to contain his enthusiasm, he said, "When do we start?" Michael's temper broke along with his concentration. He stood up, frowning in his long handles, towering over the boy. I was wrong to approach you the other day. I didn't give it enough thought." Edward's smile disappeared. "What do you mean?" "I need someone responsible and mature by my side to help me with serious matters. These are serious times. I do not need a careless boy." "I'm not careless." Michael pointed around in a huff. "I wake up in the cold, my door's open, look, the hearth's dead, and you spooking at me like an owl on a mouse. You should have brought a log in. Think of someone other than yourself, child." "That's not fair. How am I supposed to know?" Michael cut him off. "That's enough. It's done. Go." Edward got to his feet in disbelief. Michael had done it to him again. He made fists and said, "You know what, Michael? To you! Thwah!" Then he stomped out of the church. Michael didn't like what Edward had meant by that, but the anger was already abating. Perhaps it had been unnecessary to call Edward a child and an owl. Michael thought about it and scratched his chin. His whiskers were 3 weeks old. Edward was a poor choice, the gathering consequences of which had bothered Michael more than he realized. He put it out of his mind. He'd make it up to the boys some other time. Michael put on his boots, tabard, and belt. Then he opened the library with his key. Using it, the key seemed so foolish. Who would steal books they couldn't read? He left it on a shelf, muttering, "The lock should have gone on the front door." He took down a bottle of ink, a goose quill, and a piece of parchment, and sat at the round table to write. "I am at Bethenford's Inn. Michael." A cold new day waited outside. He walked through dewy grass on the way to the forge. It was too early for Jacob to be there. Michael's sleeve hung on the wall in mid-repair. He dug through the smith's toolbox, found a hammer and a spike, and then returned to the front. Michael shut the door, palmed his note against it, and notched the spike between his fingers. With the hammer raised, ready to nail his words to the church, he noticed another spike already there. It was the one he'd used the night before, when he'd been at the cauldron. He just pushed his note onto that instead. Michael didn't need to knock. The inn's doors weren't locked. Securing them behind him, he crossed the empty common room to the fireplace. It was lit, but had never really been enough to heat the size of that space, especially with how his father conserved wood. Michael took a seat next to it for warmth and waited, listening to the just-before-breakfast bustle of his family in the kitchen. Bethenford came out with a cup of coffee, surprised to find his son there. "Why, Michael! How delightful! Wait, has something other dreadful happened?" Michael said, "Not that I know of. I'm here to see someone." He gestured at the front. "You didn't lock your doors." "My word!" Bethenford started toward them. "No need. I took care of it for you." "Oh, thank you, son. We're not quite used to that yet, obviously. What a terrible mistake. I understand that's how it happened at Fergus' place." Bethenford sipped from his cup. "Who are you here to see?" Michael darkened. "Coffee." "A sailor named Biggs. Can you tell me what room he's in?" Bethenford nodded quickly, and with a charming smile. I can. It's not the kind of thing I'd tell to just anyone, of course, but you're you, aren't you? And I don't even lock the doors, so who am I?" It was an attempt to win a smile out of his dowdy son. It failed. Bethenford sat down. "I'm afraid, though, as soon as I do, you won't have a reason to speak with me any more, and you'll leave." Michael used his manners to be rude. "What would you care to discuss, sir?" "Well, you're very formal. Perhaps we should talk about defiling the dead. Thou shalt not do it, you know." Michael exhaled to calm his anger. "I've already had that discussion with Abraham. I'd rather not have it with you. I'm pressed for time. I shouldn't stray from the church for long." "And I don't blame you for that at all, not at all. Abraham is a fanatic. I wouldn't care to hear his opinions on the matter either. Michael, I don't want to force my company on you. Oh, would you care for some coffee?" "Coffee? Coffee? Not if I breathe, of all the thoughtless—" "No, sir, thank you. Just the room." "Irreverent, irresponsible suggestions. The blood of our forefathers is in your damned cup." Coffee, though traded from town to town, grew in the north. For Michael, it was an everlasting symbol of the fellowship's persecution there. For Bethenford, those events happened more than 100 years ago. Coffee was delicious and good for business. It was one of many old differences in values that the son couldn't trust his temper to discuss, and that the father had forgotten about. Bethenford said, "Son, when you asked for my help the other day, well, it was for the sailors, of course, but you haven't asked me for anything in 30 years. I was so happy to be able to do it. I want to help you. I can do more than I have, in fact. I can make everything you need to do so much easier. Don't you know that? I happen to be a very influential person around here." He reached out with his charm again. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir, I know it well. It was such a pleasure to see you at service yesterday. That's all I want. Come to service. Are you bargaining for my attendance with the lives of your flock?" Bethenford nearly spilled his coffee. "What? What's wrong with you?" He put the cup down and shook his finger at his son. "You got that surliness from your mother. My word, that's not what I'm doing at all. Of course I'm not going to hinder you in any way." Bethenford raised a solemn finger and quoted doctrine. "Thou shalt not defile the dead, son, but thou shalt also not knowingly endanger thy brothers." It was an odd way to say it. He paused and then carried on. "Burn every corpse you've a mind to. It won't be the first time doctrine's given way to practicality. Listen, Michael, you must know that I'm proud of what you're doing. But you should reconsider holding your back to God. You need Him now more than ever. We all need Him to be in your heart." Michael hadn't heard a word of it. He only smelled the wretched coffee. He stood up and linked his hands behind his back, putting his golden circle at the height of his father's eyes. "I really shouldn't stray from the church for long, sir." Bethenford sighed. "Michael, please, we've had our differences, but don't let your opinion of me, whatever that may be, stand in the way of a relationship with God." Michael softened some. Then his mother came out of the kitchen, gushing. "Oh, Michael, it's so good to see you." She was 70 years old, but could still carry a 30-pound tray of plates on one shoulder. She set it down with a clatter and gave him a big hug. "Oh, that feels so nice without your crunchy shirt. Have you come for breakfast? Why, you haven't eaten here in ages. Not that anyone else has either, since our good Fergus left. That poor, dear man." Bethenford's eyes rolled as she spoke. "Do you know that I can't blame them?" She lowered her voice hardly at all and put a hand to one side of her mouth. "Your brother's an idiot in the kitchen." Michael's older brother, Junior, had come out behind her, had been smiling, and had almost said hello before she'd called him an idiot. Junior scowled, threw his arms up in the air, and left the room without her knowing he'd been there at all. Michael's visit wasn't a special occasion for Junior anyway. He saw his brother whenever he wanted. Michael was embarrassed for him. "I'm sure he isn't that bad," their mother said. "Oh, no, he is. Awful. Dreadful. Are you out to catch yourself one of those bugaboo devils today?" She sounded like she was speaking to a child on his way with a basket to pick berries. Michael almost failed to respond. No, ma'am, not yet." A pained croak came out of his throat, and he turned back to his father. "Thank you for your advice, sir. May I have that room now, please?" Bethenford harumphed. "Sailors. Do you know the little one called me Biffer, or what was it? Boffer?" "Beaver, dear." "Oh, quite right, Beaver. Now they're all calling me that. I'd say it's rather disrespectful, considering how much I've aided them. Room and board for 10, you know. That's expensive." Michael wanted to run away again. Bethenford said, "Fine. One last question, then, before I direct you to your libidinous sailor." He stood up. Other than his long beard and his age, he was Michael's mirror. "One final burning inquiry haunts me." He looked into his son's eyes, reading them for lies. "Honestly, Bing's outhouse is right across the street. Did you absolutely have to put those beastly things in my toilet?" "Yes, sir, I did." Biggs woke up to knocking. He got out of bed, opened the door wide enough for his face, and peeked out under a mousy brown mess of hair. "Hey there, Michael. What's going on?" He picked some sleep out of his eye. "Good morning, Biggs. My apologies for disturbing you. I'm looking for Andelin. Can you tell me where she is?" "All right, yeah. Hold on a sec." Biggs shut the door, leaving Michael in the hallway. After a while, Michael leaned in close and said, "No need to bother dressing. If you could just tell me where she is." Fergus and Margot hadn't known. Michael assumed if anyone did, it would be Biggs. He wasn't prepared for what he saw when the door opened again. Andelin stood there in a fresh headscarf, wearing a man's shirt for a nightgown. Her legs were bare. "Good morning, Michael. How can I assist you?" Michael's face opened. I didn't know. He stared at her legs. Andelin put her fists on her hips, raised her eyebrow, and waited. He thought, "God's mercy, she's a harlot," but couldn't see how that made any difference. So he gathered himself, looked her in the eye, and said, "Andelin, I want to teach you." She stood speechless as she started to understand. From behind the door, Biggs said, "What's going on, Lynn? You all right?" "Michael wants me." "Tell him you're married." Andelin looked over at Biggs and said, "He wants to teach me." She shook her hands like she was drying them. "To be like them." Biggs came to the door again, equally surprised. "Want to come in or something, Michael?" Michael said, "Oh, no, I couldn't. That would be inappropriate. I should have... I'll wait for you downstairs. I need to speak with you both." He gave a hurried bow and left. Andelin and Biggs shared wide looks as they closed the door. Michael only took one bite of his breakfast. Too much salt. Eavesdroppers milled around them, mostly sailors, but also a few locals who'd noticed something was going on. Michael said, "I don't know where to start." Andelin said, "Why me?" Because of the cauldron. Truthfully, I've quite a few reasons, but it would be disrespectful of me to pour compliments onto a man's wife. Michael turned to Biggs. Forgive me. All of this is very unconventional. I didn't know, and I certainly didn't mean to offend. Biggs laughed. You're all right, Michael. Don't worry about me. We're not. He turned to Andelin as he spoke. Looking at her, he didn't want to make it clear they weren't married. It meant something to make that distinction. We do things a little different overseas. Andelin smiled at him. Michael said, I see. Thank you. I must say I have a deep respect for what you sailors have done, what you've survived with such courage. Your story is similar to our own fellowship's history, in a way, except that yours was an enemy impossible to face. My ancestors fled because they refused to fight. He exhaled and poked at his food. I promised a boy I would instruct him. We were supposed to begin this morning, but things didn't go well. It was his youth. He was inconsiderate. He didn't even bring me anything to eat. Honestly, I was so angry with him I changed my mind right there on the spot. Andelin found Michael's impetus amusing. He said, It wasn't just that, though. I needed to make a better choice. I have to make the best choice. He stared at her. I had a discussion with Fergus and Margot about you yesterday. You disappeared after the assembly. They're worried for you. They are excellent people. I regret not having informed them of my whereabouts. Michael smiled. I would have approached you right away if you weren't a woman. Her eyebrow went up again. An understandable hesitation. Michael laughed. Well, it was a difficult option for me to see. There's never been a woman in the circle. We had a law against it. But the circle is gone, and so are those laws. Now my first priority is Antioch. I need someone else who can say that. Someone who can put others first and make this city their priority. Can you do that, Andelin? I can. I have, since the day I boarded the Grace. Michael nodded. That reminds me. I thought you'd want to know what this really says. He took out Ezekiel's note and flattened it on the table, pointing out the symbols as he read them aloud. Armageddon is arrived. Break your silence. Open the library. He sat back, expecting a reaction. The sailors only looked confused. He said, And this last mark here is his real name, Ezekiel. The terms and their significance didn't carry the weight he'd thought they would. So, Michael clarified, we're going to start a new order and make new laws. This will be our first stroke. We'll put it through the middle. I want to change everything. With dedicated practice, you'll be ready to teach someone else within a year. In 10 years, we'll have 1,000 paladins in Antioch. No one was eavesdropping anymore. They'd all gathered around to pay close attention, excited by what they were witnessing. It was the planning of a new age for humanity, right there, over a red and white checkered tablecloth. Andelin was inspired to be a part of it. Unprecedented, an astonishing proposal. Tell me, what is that word, paladin? Is that what you are? Michael said, It means protector. Until then, a paladin's highest priority was to protect the way. They were going to change that too. Do you accept? She felt a rush of pride to say, I do. Ditch said, Holy crap! Michael flinched, disgusted by the expression. People started congratulating Andelin, but Michael wasn't finished yet, and he called for their attention. That's not all. Listen to me. This is the most dangerous time for us. I must stay in the church, where I can be found without trouble. I can't be gallivanting around town. Now, the Fellowship can build a wall. We've good stonemasons here, but they're not fighters. They'll need an organized guard. You sailors must do this. Patrol, answer calls for help, and protect this community. We'll stand together against these devils. The room cheered, unified behind him. Ditch put his fist in his palm with a smack. Right on, man. That's what's up. The Circle had avoided political power since the Reformation, seeing it as a source of corruption. Michael saw no choice but to abandon that point of view, along with his other former priorities, and take command. In a bold move that depended on people accepting his authority, he held out his hand to Biggs and said, Sheriff the guard for us. Biggs was taken by surprise and slow to accept. He did, though, and congratulations came for him. Yeah, all right. He laughed. Yeah, do the best I can, Michael. Andelin put her arm around Biggs and gave him a fierce smile. Then she turned and found the same expression on Ditch. There was a future in what Michael had proposed, something other than death, and something more than just survival. Michael stood and told Andelin, Get plenty of sleep. Come when you can. I will always be in the church. Then he left his father's house, and all but that one bite of his breakfast. That is the end of Chapter 19. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99 or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 20, Acolyte.